Well, hello in Falcha. This is David McDonnell on December 27, 2020, the last podcast of the calendar year 2020, a year which will live in infamy, I believe. This is my random thoughts from County Antrim, where I tell some stories, some yarns, historical information, and whatever random thoughts come into my head during the week. Now, this was, of course, Christmas week. Christmas was Friday, and it was different than Christmases past with the pandemic and all. But I hope you and your family had a very Merry Christmas nonetheless. And my thoughts go out to the thousands of people who spent Christmas Day in the hospital with the virus. But I'm not going to talk about Christmas today. Instead, I'm going to talk about Christmas was Friday. I'm going to talk about yesterday's holidays. And depending on where you were yesterday was either Boxing Day or St. Stephen's Day or Wren's Day, the Day of the Wrens. And all three of those days are celebrated the day after Christmas. Let me tell you a little bit about those. St. Stephen was known for serving the poor, and St. Stephen's Day is traditionally celebrated as, with charitable giving, alms for the poor. And it's been that way for hundreds and hundreds of years in both Britain and in Ireland. And this became known as Boxing Day in the United Kingdom. And it's a national holiday throughout the U.K., which includes Northern Ireland and many other places in the world that once were British colonies or part of the British Commonwealth of Nations, particularly Canada and Australia. But why is it called Boxing Day? It has nothing to do with boxing, fisticuffs. But it's still called Boxing Day, and no one is really certain why. But there are a couple of theories, and they all have to do with containers, boxes. And that's where the name boxing comes from, as the containers of boxes. Now, one of those theories is that churches had boxes for donations during the Christmas season. And the day after Christmas, the boxes were opened, and whatever was inside was then distributed to the poor. And there's another theory dating back hundreds of years where working class people on the day after Christmas would carry boxes to whoever they did work for during the year, and hoping they would receive something, as in a tip, so to speak, to put in the box as a reward for whatever services they provided during the year. There's a third theory, and that was that the lords and the ladies, the nobility, the British nobility, of course, celebrated Christmas at home, and equally, of course, could not be expected to do any work on Christmas Day, so that they maintained a full staff of servants and cooks and stable boys and everyone else that was typically on staff for the lords and the ladies. Those folks had to work on Christmas Day in order to serve their masters. Now, the help were given the day off after Christmas, the day after Christmas. And they were often given a box of leftovers and perhaps gifts or whatever by their master to take home with them the day after Christmas. And of course, they carried that box home and shared the box with their families. Anyway, one of those theories may be the right one. There may be yet another. No one really knows. But the day after Christmas has been known in Britain for quite some time, for many centuries, as Boxing Day. Now, Boxing Day isn't much of a charity day anymore. What it is a big shopping day. It's much like Black Friday in America. And it's actually more like Boxing Week, because there are sales going on all week long on the day and the several days after Christmas. And Boxing Day also is a big day for sports. Football and rugby and cricket, horse racing, all of which people either go as a spectator or they watch on TV on Boxing Day. Now, Boxing Day is celebrated much the same way in Ireland. It's just not called Boxing Day. It's called St. Stephen's Day. And it, too, is a national holiday. And all the banks and public offices are closed. Now, the religious folks may think of it as a day of charity and help for the poor, as it should be, I suppose. But for everyone else, it's a day off. It's a day for shopping, and it's a day for sports. Now, St. Stephen's Day is also known in Ireland, at least historically, as Wren's Day, or the Day of the Wrens, which is not a good thing for the wrens, because Wren's Day involves the killing of a wren and putting a dead bird on the end of a stick and parading it around town. That's Wren's Day. What did wrens do to deserve this fate? Again, there's a couple of theories. One involves St. Stephen. St. Stephen was the first, is thought of as the first Christian martyr. And he was stoned to death because of his Christian beliefs. Right around the year 33. Think how far long ago that was. The year 33. And what a way to die. Have people throw rocks at you until you die from it. But according to Irish legend, Stephen was in hiding from his enemies who were about to stone him. And he was betrayed by the chirping of a wren. Now there's another Irish legend, and it takes place around the 7th or 8th century when Irish warriors were approaching a Viking camp, and they were hoping to surprise the Vikings and drive away these intruders. But as they got close, a wren landed on top of a Viking drum, and there were some breadcrumbs on the drum. And the wren started pecking away at the breadcrumbs, which of course meant he was pecking away at the drum. And that sound of the pecking on the drum alerted the Vikings, and the Irish hope of a surprise ended. And there actually is perhaps even an older theory or legend, and that goes back to the Druids, the pre-Christian era of Ireland. Right around the winter solstice, the wren somehow became associated with the past year. And so the tradition evolved of killing the wren to do away with the past and move to the forward. So I don't know, whatever the wren did wrong, they've suffered for it for a long, long time. Because on the Day of the Wrens, what happened is boys would hunt a wren. And when they found one, they would throw stones at it till they killed it. They would grab the dead bird and put it on the end of a stick and then parade around town with the dead wren. And they did this sometimes or oftentimes to collect money that people would donate to the boys when they paraded around with their dead wren. Now, fortunately, that part of the custom is ended, at least the killing of wrens. I've seen photographs that look like they were in the early 20th century with people on parade with poles with a dead wren at the end of the pole. But wren boys still exist, but it's more in the nature of theater than it is of the killing of wrens. What happens in particularly some rural areas of Ireland, men dress up as wrens. They wear a mask. They have straw all over their body. They wear motley clothing. And they march through town to collect money for charity. And I'm not sure how much money is raised, but I think the people who participate have a lot of fun doing it. It's more in the nature of a Mardi Gras than it is the killing of Wrens. Now, the people in County Kerry and Dingle are particularly active in keeping this tradition alive, and preparations go on for weeks and weeks, getting things organized for the parade route and the costumes and everything else, and they have a great deal of fun celebrating Wren's Day. So that's it. That's Boxing Day, St. Stephen's Day, the Day of the Wren, all in a nutshell. More fun, maybe, even than Christmas. Who knows? Now, since I ended the story in Dingle, I thought I would tell you a story which is set, at least in part, in Dingle. And I learned this story when I was in Dingle, and I've only told it once. I was at an affair, I think it was in Reno, and had a real nice audience, going through a whole bunch of stories and engaging the audience. We were conversing as we went along. And I discovered that one of the people in the audience was from France. And I don't know if that I've had anyone in my audience that's from France before, so I decided to tell this story. And the story is how Marie Antoinette almost became an Irish woman. Now, almost may be too strong of a word. Maybe it's a true story about a plot to make Marie Antoinette Irish. Now, Marie, you know the story, I'm sure. Marie Antoinette, she was born in Vienna, like 1755. She was in the royal family of Austria. And to obtain an alliance between the Austrians and the French, she was pledged to marry Louis. She was only 11 years old at the time, and Louis was only 11, and Louis was heir to the French throne. The two were married a few years later, I think 1770-ish, when they were both only 14 years old. But a few years after that, King Louis died, and young Louis became King Louis XVI. And so at the age of 19, Marie Antoinette became Queen of France. Now, she was not well liked by the French. She was frivolous. She was extravagant, all in the face of widespread poverty in France. She may never have said, "Let them eat cake," when French peasants were protesting for lack of bread. But she was a symbol of French extravagance, French nobility extravagance, which ultimately led to the French Revolution. Now, with the French Revolution, they wrote a constitution, and they established a constitutional monarchy. But as a result of various plots to restore a more powerful monarchy, the king and the queen were both imprisoned. And a new national convention was convened in France, and they formally abolished the monarchy of France. And Louis was placed in prison, and Marie and her 3 children were placed in virtually house arrest in Paris. Now, I'll come back to Paris and France in a bit, but I want to take the story now to Ireland. I'll tell you about Black Tom Rice and his son James Rice. They were wine traders and merchants, and they were quite prosperous in Dingle. Now, the term wine trader in Irish is a polite way of saying that they were smugglers. They developed close ties with wine merchants in France and in Spain. And they purchased wine for distribution in Ireland and in the British Isles, without paying taxes on it. And they had their home in Dingle. It's known as the Rice House, which is still there, by the way. It had been used as a medical clinic for a while, and the last I heard, it was for sale, if you're at all interested. Now, the rocky coast of Western Ireland is often historically been used by smugglers. There are many peninsulas, bays, inlets, with sharp cliffs and rocky shores. It makes it very difficult to be patrolled by the British Navy. It's very difficult to sail in those waters unless the captain happens to know the waters very well. And there's also a lot of sea caves. These are caverns carved out below the cliffs, and they're easily accessible by shore during low tide, but only by currach boat during high tide. And it's an easy way to hide smuggled goods in these sea caves, and thus avoid payment of British taxes, and avoid being seen by the British Navy. Now, there's one particular cliff in Dingle Harbor. It's known as Nancy Brown's Parlor. How it got that name, I don't know. But one can get a beautiful view of Dingle Harbor from the top of Nancy Brown's Parlor. And beneath the parlor, though, is one of these sea caves. And undoubtedly it was one used by Black Tom and James Rice to hide their smuggled wine. Now, James Rice went to school in Belgium, and he later joined the Austrian army. It may sound odd to you, but it really wasn't for the era, because there were few educational opportunities for Catholics in Ireland at the time. And many Irish Catholics went to school in Europe and served in a European army. Now, what was unusual is that James became close friends with Joseph. This Joseph later became Emperor Joseph II of the Austrian Empire. And Joseph named both Black Tom and James as counts of the empire. And Joseph was Marie Antoinette's older brother. So when Marie Antoinette was imprisoned in Paris, Count James and Count Black Tom initiated a plot for her escape. And what they did is they bribed jailers to cooperate. They set up way stations between Paris and the coast, and they had one of their merchant ships moored along the coast in the English Channel. And they had a room at the Rice House already prepared for Marie Antoinette's arrival. And so they had this elaborate plot, financed and ready to go, seemingly foolproof, to take Marie Antoinette, get her out of Paris, and safe in Dingle in Ireland. At the last minute, though, Marie Antoinette refused to go because the escape plot was just for her and her alone. And she refused to abandon her husband, and she refused to abandon her children. And so she remained in Paris. Now, while in prison, Louis XVI wrote letters to European royalty, urging them to invade France and restore the monarchy. And some of these letters were intercepted and were considered treasonous. And so Louis was tried and convicted of a conspiracy to undermine the Republic. And for that he was executed by the guillotine off with his head. That was in 1793. Now, Marie Antoinette was accused of being involved in the plots as well. The evidence against her wasn't near as strong, but she was convicted anyway. And she was executed by guillotine, lost her head in the same year, 1793. She was 37 years old, and she never did become Irish. So that's the story of Marie Antoinette and how she almost became an Irish woman. So that's the end, the only story I wanted to tell you today. I have another story I planned to tell, but I don't think I have time to because it's going to take a little bit longer. I've been overwhelmed this past couple of weeks updating my website. It's looking good. You're going to see this podcast. You're going to see some of my prior writings on there now, and you're going to see more in the weeks ahead. So please take a look at my new and improved website. That's clandonald.net. Send me an email at clandonald@gmail.com with comments about podcasts, comments about whatever, suggestions for future podcasts. What would you like to hear? Decided to get away from politics today because I've been overwhelmed with it the last few weeks. So I thought I'd just tell you a little historical tidbits and holiday stories instead. Take a look at my Facebook site. I haven't put anything on my Facebook site in a while, so I'm overdue for that. So I'll be doing that soon as well, trying to figure out what else to do. I've been trying my best to line up festivals for the year 2021. I've almost given up for the first half of the year. When I first tried lining them up, I thought things were going to be better next year. And it turns out, as I speak right now, the pandemic is worse today than I think it's been all year long. So I think it's probably not a good idea for people to gather in large numbers for the several months into 2021. And even then, who knows what the attitudes and safety will be as we progress next year. It's got to be better than 2020, but who knows how much better. Maybe it's a good year to do something different, which maybe I'll finish my book. Maybe that's what I'll do instead. But that's all I have to tell you today. Please join me again next week when I have another random thoughts from County Antrim. So goodbye.